Welcome to Gong For You, everyone. My name is Dart. What do we talk about here? We talk about tea and teaware, culture, history, and education. If you like any of the beautiful pieces that we see today or anything that you see in this prompt that's coming up right now, make sure to head over to our website and check it out because we have some really dope teaware. Let's get into it though. Today we're talking about the difference between the three different types of ceramics that we see in pottery: earthenware, stoneware, and porcelain. Now, if you think you know everything about it, I promise there's a few new things for you. So stick with me for the whole video. We're gonna talk about what defines each of these three types, what types of clay works best, and then what types of teaware applications we see for each of these types. Also, stick around to the end. We're gonna talk about wood, metal, and glass teaware as well. So first off, we have earthenware, like this cup here. Now, what is earthenware? Well, earthenware is the lowest temperature fired of all of the three types of ceramics, like this cup here. One easy way to tell a lot of earthenware is the only part that will be exposed on the whole entire pot or cup is that bottom rim right there. This isn't the only indicator, and it's actually something that when I first started studying tea, I thought that everything that was fired with the glazes were earthenware, and that's simply not the case, but we'll talk about that when we get to stoneware. Don't get ahead of me. Earthenware is fired between 1,000 and 1,150 degrees Celsius. Don't ask me the Fahrenheit, I don't know. For those of you who are in America like me who don't really know much about Celsius, well, you're gonna wanna learn the metric system because a lot of pottery and a lot of tea is done in metrics. It's just easier. The numbers work out better. They use the Celsius and the milliliters, not ounces and not, what's the other thing? Oh yeah, Fahrenheit. So what's a good example of something that's not teaware that you might see that's earthenware? Easiest example is gonna be a planter's pot. Now the reason that the planter's pot is such a good example is the exact reason that we get it for plants. So when you pour water in, if the dirt is saturated and the water pours out, it can pour out of the bottom. And that brings us to the next point, which is porosity. As we progress, vitrification and porosity are going to be opposites. Earthenware is extremely porous, so it is not vitrified. And as we progress, we'll see it even out and then sweat when we get to porcelain. Going to the planter's pot example, this is unglazed, right? So any teaware that you see that is earthenware is going to be glazed, right? Just makes sense because if it wasn't, the water would pass through it. Earthenware is literally as old as dirt. Like, it is the oldest thing that we see in terms of pottery, and it's been around for literally thousands of years. It has manifested, it has grown, it has changed, but it all comes and stems from the original earthenware. So it's pretty cool, because that's our history to our past. Like, the earthenware is the connection to the origin of teaware, or just pottery in general, which is pretty cool. Because we know how to fire it, because it's simple, because pretty much any clay can be used for it, it's typically gonna be your cheapest type of pottery, which we like. Anytime you can see some cheaper teaware that you can use and is accessible, that's awesome. So we're excited about that. Next, we have stoneware. Now, if you're a tea nerd, when you see stoneware, you hear the word stoneware, you think of things that are unglazed, like this clay cup right here from Qinzhou. However, I have news for you. Some stoneware is actually glazed. We actually have two examples of stoneware that's glazed, but we'll get into that later. So for right now, first thing we need to talk about is the temperature. This is gonna be fired at mid temperature, so 1,200 to 1,300 degrees Celsius. I probably should pull down the curtain on this one too. Temperature is not the best example for how we should really talk about teaware because it's not really just temperature, it's temperature over time. We'll talk about that later in the video. The main thing to understand here is it's gonna get hotter consistently over time as we progress through these, okay? The benefits that we see in a cup like this one that is not glazed is it is semi-porous. Think of the four main big cities. If you know anything about unglazed stoneware from China, there's really four big cities. We have Yixing, we have Chaozhou, we have Qinzhou, and then we have Jianshui. And Jianshui is, it's a county, it's not a city, so it's places in China. These four all have benefits because the tea soaks into them because they're semi-porous. Not so porous that they will pour out the bottom like in the planter's pot, so we're progressing. Again, earthenware, not vitrified, very porous. Stoneware, semi-porous, semi-vitrified. Can you guess what porcelain is? A lot of fun things start to happen when we get to the stoneware temperature range in teaware. The first thing is, this is where most of our reduction firings come. Now again, what is reduction? It is the deprivation of oxygen in the firing, and so what does this do? It pulls colors from clays, it pulls colors from glazes, and so we get a change in a glaze, in a composition. The best example of this would be celadons, the jade glaze. Right? So if this was fired in oxidation, it would be yellow, but because it was fired in reduction, it is green. So this is an example of a glazed piece that's fired at a stoneware temperature. Same thing with this. The metallic glaze, also fired at a stoneware temperature, not earthenware, even though these are both glazed. So these are two examples of glazed pieces that are fired at stoneware temperature. The rest of them, though, will be fired typically unglazed, like the 4 locations that I mentioned previously. Stoneware is more dense because, again, molecularly, we're getting tighter together. Earthenware is kind of loosey-goosey. It's porous, it's not really super tight. Stoneware is kind of in the middle. And then we get to porcelain, whoosh, it's gonna be the tightest, but hang with me here. It is more dense, so it is stronger than we get in earthenware pieces. It's hardy and it's strong. And it's fired closer to maturity. Now, this is an important concept. Firing to maturity is basically when the molecular structure is as tight as it can be. The problem is not all clays can be fired to maturity at the same temperature. There are some clays that have to be fired at lower temperatures to be fired closer to maturity, and so they're weaker by default. And so they don't get as strong. So a clay that is mixed or is grainy and just isn't as good, that fires at earthenware temperatures is not gonna be as strong as stoneware or porcelain. Due to this composition, again, it's gonna be stronger and better for thermal shock once we get to stoneware temperatures as well, which is why we see kettles that are often made of stoneware clay teapots. Next, guys, we have porcelain. Absolutely beautiful. Here is a pretty classic style. This is the Qinghua, which is the blue painted porcelain. Porcelain is thin and it is fine. And my wife actually and I have a theory that if we lived in a science fiction world, that Chinese people would actually be elves, just based on the way that they live. Think about it. If you've been to China, if you talk to Chinese people, you gotta think about it. But porcelain is the perfect example of what would be elven teaware. Why? It is very, very strong, but it is very, very thin. It's fragile and oftentimes breaks in the kiln because, well, if any variable is just a little bit off, say goodbye to that piece. It is very fine. It is strong. It is often glazed in Jingdezhen, but Jingdezhen is not the only player in the game. And in fact, let's take a look at a few of those. So I want to turn our understanding of porcelain on its head. This is what we would classically see again from Jingdezhen. It has the blue underglaze, it has the clear transparent overglaze, but because porcelain is vitrified, meaning it has this glass-like texture, and it is not porous at all, it does not need to be glazed. The reason that it's glazed is for the smoothness that you get. However, there are other places in the world, like Dehua, that do not glaze their porcelain. And it's absolutely beautiful. It's matte, but it's soft and smooth. It feels like jade. Like the jade glaze looks like jade, but this feels, I mean, it is soft and smooth, but it's almost warm to the touch. Not like porcelain. It feels kind of callous and distant and just glassy. Again, this is Dehua. Typically, Dehua porcelain is not going to be adorned or not going to have a lot on it, which is why we just put the little logo on the front, unlike in Jingdezhen, where again, they're going to have a bunch of things all over. And that's cool. They're just two different styles, right? This one is going to have, again, a lot on it. This is probably going to have less on it from Dehua. Then we have this guy. So this is a beautiful example of black porcelain. Now, black porcelain doesn't exist by itself. What this is porcelain that has been cut. And when I say cut, I mean they added a different type of clay in with this. But we get this beautiful, look at this beautiful brown rim from the wood firing and the mixing of this black porcelain. Absolutely gorgeous. So the point here is you can mix porcelain. A lot of times porcelain isn't mixed because of its purity, because of how nice it is, but this is an absolutely gorgeous piece and it shouldn't detract from it just because it's not white and doesn't follow what was been laid before. All right, so we need to talk about the problem with temperature. Why is temperature a problem? Why did I mention that referring to temperature is an issue? Well, think of when you're heating up your stove, right? When you're heating up your stove, you preheat it, buzzer goes off, bing, 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 and then you put your food in, right? With a kiln, it doesn't work like that though. The pottery is in at the beginning when you're heating up your kiln. And so we have these cones, right? They're small little pyramids or cone-shaped pieces that are put in the kiln. And when you get to a certain temperature, it will start to or bend over. And that's how we know that we're at that cone. So cones measure temperature over time, not just straight temperature. So basically we can get in that zone and stay in that zone of temperature over time, which is why they use cones in pottery, not just temperature. Finally, we have glass, wood, and metal. Now, glass is really, really easy. We know a ton about glass. Glass doesn't hold any heat, and so it's really, really great for low temperature teas, green teas, right? So glass is really great for that. Additionally, glass is great because you can actually see the color of the tea, right? You can see the liqueur, and so it's very, very obviously beneficial in that. Next, we have wood. Wood, well, we don't see a ton of wood in modern teaware. There was a time when wood was very, very commonplace in teaware. And we learned some interesting things with this brew cup so far. So first of all, the heat dissipation in the gaiwan itself, in the brew cup itself, is very fast. So the heat dissipates very quickly. But the temperature in the tea holds closer to like what a stoneware piece of pottery would, which is very interesting. So it doesn't hold the heat so you don't burn yourself, but it holds the heat in the tea for those teas that you want to keep at a higher heat. Absolutely incredible, really cool. But again, we're still doing research on that. And then metal, this is a bad example of metal. There are actually really nice silver or gold lined teapots. We just don't have any yet that we're working with. But really what we want to talk about here is the jury's still out on metal. Okay, the jury's still out. No one has done a lot of research on it. People have speculated this or that effect, but we want to do a little bit more digging before we can really confidently say anything about metal and teaware. Well, werewolves, thanks for letting me talk to you about the different types of ceramics today. That's all I got for you. Okay, bye-bye.